My name is Eleanor Hayes, and the morning my husband brought me breakfast in bed, I learned that love can sometimes taste like ashes. It was the day everything changed. My body faltered, my hope slipped through my fingers, and I realized the man I trusted more than anyone might not be who I thought he was. I remember sunlight filtering through the curtains, the pale Indiana sky behind them like a watercolor. I'd been feeling unsteady for weeks, the kind of morning sickness that made every breath feel uncertain. My doctor called it severe, the kind of thing that required rest and caution. Still, I held on to a kind of joy, fragile but real. I was going to be a mother again. At 52, it surprised even me. Life has a way of handing you miracles when you least expect them. My husband David had never been the doting type. He loved me, at least I believed he did, but it was a practical love. He fixed the sink when it leaked, kept our lawn neat enough for the neighborhood association, drove me to the county fair every fall, because he knew I liked the quilts and the pumpkin displays. He was steady, dependable, a man who folded his shirts with rulers, straight lines. So when he stepped into our bedroom with a tray, eggs, toast, fruit, and a cup of tea, my heart fluttered. "Thought I'd take care of you," he said, setting the tray down with an awkward kind of care. His voice was softer than usual, like he was trying out a tone he wasn't used to. The food smelled warm and comforting. I thanked him, and he kissed my forehead, lingering just a little too long. For a moment, it felt like grace, like love returning home. After he left the room, I rubbed my hands over the blanket and watched the steam curl up from the tea. I imagined a future where David changed, became the kind of partner who felt like a harbor instead of a routine. I imagined him humming to the baby, touching my stomach with reverence. I imagined family. I imagined hope. I ate slowly, trying to keep the nausea at bay. The toast was a little burnt, the eggs slightly rubbery, but it didn't stop me from feeling moved. He was trying. That's what mattered. About 20 minutes later, a dizziness rolled through me. Not the kind I was used to, not the typical morning sickness spell that passed with a deep breath. This felt heavier, like a wave pulling me under. I lay back against the pillows and shut my eyes. My chest tightened. The room tilted. I don't want to dwell on the details of what happened next. Some moments in life don't need to be dissected to be understood. It's enough to say that the baby didn't make it, and I ended up in the emergency room with doctors and nurses moving quietly around me, their faces gentle, their hands certain. They used words like complications and stress on the body, and they asked me if I had eaten anything unusual. When I said my husband had made breakfast, they nodded, just nodded, and wrote something on a chart. Not suspicious, just part of the process. But that image stayed with me, the quiet pen scratching the paper. David showed up 30 minutes later, his shirt tucked in, too tight, his collar skewed, panic in his eyes. But underneath the panic, beneath the forced tremble in his voice, I sensed something else. Relief, or maybe I imagined it. Grief is a lens that distorts everything. Grief makes ghosts out of shadows. He held my hand, but his fingers were cold. "We'll get through this," he whispered. I stared at him, and for the first time in 23 years of marriage, I realized I did not know this man at all. The days after were quiet. He brought me tea without asking. He hovered. He took time off work. He tried so hard to look like a good man that it had the opposite effect. I found myself watching him, like a stranger, noticing little movements, small hesitations. Once I slipped into the kitchen early and found him dumping something down the sink, something from a small bottle, amber liquid, swirling in the drain. He froze when he saw me, smiled too quickly, and said, "Just cleaning old stuff out of the cabinets." His voice cracked on the word old. I didn't ask questions. I wasn't ready to know the answers. But I did look. In the quiet hours of the afternoon, when he thought I was resting, I opened drawers. I checked the trash. I studied his phone when he left it on the counter to shower. A message, just one, caught my eye. "It's almost done. Be patient." No name attached. Just a number I didn't recognize. My heart knocked hard against my ribs. I put the phone down gently, like it might burn me. A week passed. Then two. I tried to heal. I tried to breathe. I tried to forgive a world that felt suddenly cruel. I went back to church on Sunday mornings, sat in the back pew where no one would ask questions. I knitted in the evenings, the yarn soft between my fingers, like a promise that something in life was still gentle. But every time I looked at David, feeding the birds in the yard, wiping his shoes, before coming inside, stirring sugar into his coffee, I felt a tremor of fear. Not fear that he'd hurt me again. Fear that he already had, and I had let him. One night I woke to the sound of our back door closing. I slipped out of bed slowly, careful not to let the floorboards creak. I peeked through the curtains. David was standing by the shed, hands stuffed in his coat pockets, staring into the dark like someone waiting for a sign. My breath fogged the glass. That's when I knew whatever had happened to me wasn't just fate or misfortune. Something was wrong. Something was broken. And the longer I stayed quiet, the more it would own me. I went back to bed, pulled the blankets up, and let the truth settle in like winter air, cold, sharp, undeniable. The next morning, I called my sister in Ohio and asked for the number of her lawyer. I wasn't ready to confront David. Not yet. Grief had stripped me down to bone. But revenge, quiet, patient, careful, would help me rebuild. Not revenge born from malice. Revenge born from dignity. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't to scream. It's to whisper the truth to yourself. And then act. I didn't leave the house right away. At my age, you learn that running only gets you tired. But planning will get you somewhere. So I kept moving through the days, like nothing inside me had changed, even though everything had. I still made the bed, every morning, still opened the curtains to the Indiana sun, still swept crumbs from the kitchen counter with my sleeve. David and I moved like two actors in a play we no longer remembered auditioning for. He poured my coffee. I thanked him. I folded his laundry. He kissed the top of my head. But beneath every gesture was a silence so loud it rang in my ears. That Monday, I made an appointment with the doctor, not with the man who handled my emergency care, but with someone new in the next town over. I wanted fresh eyes, someone who didn't already know me, as the woman who walked in with heartbreak instead of symptoms. I wanted a doctor who would listen. Her office smelled like citrus and sanitizer. She wore glasses with frames the color of wildflowers and had the kind of voice that made you feel like you could breathe again. She asked questions gently, how long I'd felt sick, what I'd eaten, if there had been stress at home. When she asked about the breakfast David had made, I hesitated. I wasn't ready to say the fear out loud, not because I didn't believe it, but because saying things aloud has a way of making them real in a way thinking never does. She didn't push. She just nodded, made a note, and said something I hadn't heard since everything happened. Grief doesn't always show up how we expect. Sometimes it hides in our bodies. Sometimes it waits for us to catch up. Before I left, she pressed a card into my hand with numbers for support groups, nutritionists, and therapists. I tucked it into my purse like a seed. When I got home, the house smelled like bleach. David was on his knees, scrubbing the kitchen floor, a bucket beside him. Steam lifting from the tiles. He looked up at me breathless, and something in my stomach nodded. He never cleaned like this. Not even when the water heater burst 2 winters ago and the basement flooded. He'd hired a company then. But here he was, now sleeves, rolled up knuckles, red and raw. "I just thought I'd get ahead on chores," he said. His voice was too bright, like a man trying to whistle in the dark. I smiled or something like it. "Thank you." That night after he fell asleep, I sat on the couch with the television off and the lawyer's number written on a slip of paper in my hands. My sister had warned me, "Don't confront him until you have proof, Ellie. Men like that, if they did what you think, they'll try to make you doubt yourself. Gather first. Protect yourself." Protect myself. I rolled the words around, like stones in my mouth. The next morning, I drove to the pharmacy and bought a lockbox. Not for valuables. I'd lost the thing I valued most already. It was for information. I started keeping receipts, dates, screenshots of messages. Anything that felt like a thread I could pull later. I recorded how often he left the house, late at night. I wrote down the times he returned. I became a historian of my own life, documenting the erosion of a marriage. One evening, I found a crumpled receipt in the trash from a hardware store town over, a bottle of wood varnish nails, and something called organic compound. I didn't know what any of it meant, but there was a number on the receipt for a contractor. I dialed it from my cell phone, heart knocking around, like a loose shutter in a storm. It rang twice. Then a woman picked up. "This is Miller Repairs," she said, brisk and tired. I swallowed. "Did my husband hire you recently, David Hayes?" A pause. "Ma'am, I can't give out that kind of information without—" "I understand." I could feel the urge to apologize rising, but I bit it down. I was done apologizing for fishing in my own life. "Thank you for your time." "Wait," she said, voice softening. "Hayes, was that for the shed?" The man said he needed it sealed tight, wanted it insulated. Another pause. Said his wife was sensitive to smells, and he didn't want her to notice anything. My hand trembled. "Thank you," I whispered, and hung up before she could ask anything else. When David came home that night, I watched him carefully. He kissed my cheek, like always, but his eyes flicked to my purse, then to my phone, just for a second. Then he looked away. I wondered if he had noticed me pulling away, if he could feel the distance, like a draft under a door. On Wednesday, I went to our church for the first time in months. I told David I was going to pray. It wasn't a lie. I needed something bigger than myself to hold what I was carrying. The pews were half filled with people I'd known most of my life. Mrs. Hampton asked if I wanted to join the quilting group again. I said maybe. Pastor Lewis asked if he could pray for my healing. I nodded. No one asked about David. Maybe they'd already heard whispers. Small towns have a way of knowing. After service, I sat on the front steps and dialed the lawyer. His voice was calm, measured. "Mrs. Hayes, the first step is to secure what's yours. Do you have access to your accounts?" "Yes." "Good. You'll need to separate your finances, quietly. If anything escalates, call the police. Safety, first, and Eleanor." He paused. "Do not confront him until we know exactly what we're dealing with." I hung up feeling steadier, like I'd found a railing in the dark. That night, as rain pattered against the windows, David sat across from me at the dinner table. He chewed slowly, eyes fixed on his plate. I realized then that he was scared, not of being caught, of losing control, of losing the version of me he thought he owned. He reached for my hand. I let him take it. His palm was damp. "I want us to get better," he said, voice trembling. "I want to be a better man for you." For a moment, I almost believed him. But then I remembered the message, the shed, the breakfast tray, the doctor's pen scratching across the chart. There are lies we can forgive, and there are lies that rot from the inside out. I pulled my hand back gently and stood. "I'm going to bed." He stared at me, something dark flickering in his gaze. "Ellie," he said, "we can fix this. Maybe once, but not now. Not like this." In our bedroom, I locked the door. I pressed my forehead to the wood and breathed. I wasn't ready to confront him, but I was getting close. Close enough to feel the truth, moving beneath the surface, like a current shifting the riverbed. Close enough to know that whatever mask he wore, it wouldn't stay on much longer. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise and sat at the edge of the bed, listening to the house breathe. Old homes in Indiana have their own heartbeats, pipes sigh, floorboards whisper the wind, tugs at the siding like a restless child. I'd always found comfort in those sounds. Now they felt like warnings. I reached for my phone. There was a new message from that same unknown number. She hasn't said anything, has she? No name, no punctuation. Just that sentence sitting like poison in my inbox. I didn't reply. Downstairs, David was already in the kitchen, humming. The smell of bacon and biscuits drifted through the air. He turned when I stepped in, his smile, too wide, too polished. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, sliding a plate across the counter toward me. "Thought I'd start your day right." There was a time those words might have made me feel cherished. Now they felt like traps laid with silverware. I poured myself coffee and sat across from him. The bacon shimmered with grease under the lights. I didn't touch it. "Doctor says I need to take it easy with heavy foods," I said. "Lie number 1 of the day." David blinked. "Oh, sure. I'll remember that." Silence stretched between us, taut and thin. He wiped his palms on a dish towel and leaned forward. "You know," he said, voice, lowering grief, "can make you confused." He tapped his temple gently, like knocking dust off a shelf. "Sometimes we see shadows where there aren't any." I held his gaze, and sometimes I said shadows mean something's blocking the light. For a moment, something like panic flared in his eyes. Then he smiled, brittle as old paper. "I just want us to move on." Move on. From what? I wondered. From who? After breakfast, I drove to the shed behind the house. The hardware repairs were recent enough that the boards still smelled of fresh pine. The lock had been changed. I traced my fingers over the metal, cold and unfamiliar. Whatever David had done here, he didn't want me to know about it. I stepped back, snapped a photo of the lock, and sent it to the lawyer with the message, "He's hiding something." The reply came minutes later. "Do not attempt to break in. Document only." It felt strange, obeying rules, when my world had already broken them. But I did. For now. Later that week, I drove into town to pick up groceries. A bag of oranges, a loaf of bread, a bouquet of daisies, something soft to bring back into the house. On my way out, I nearly bumped into Mary Collins, a woman who had known David since high school. She looked startled to see me. "Eleanor," she blurted, smoothing her blouse, "I've been meaning to call. How are you holding up? I knew what she was really asking. In small towns, news doesn't travel by word. It travels by breath. It seeps through cracks like cold air. I'm finding my footing, I said. She nodded, biting her lip. Look, if you ever need a place to stay, or just someone to listen, my door is always open. There it was again, that softness, that pity curling around the edges. I wanted to hate it, but I was too tired. Before she could walk away, she hesitated. I probably shouldn't say this, she whispered, stepping closer. But I saw David at Lakeside Motel 2 weeks ago. With someone. A woman. Could have been business, I guess, but she trailed off. The world went very quiet. Even the automatic doors seemed to freeze. Thank you, I said, the words tasting like steel. Back home, I put the groceries away and sat on the kitchen floor, back pressed to the cabinets. The daisies rested beside me, petals trembling like my hands. I wasn't surprised by the possibility of infidelity. Betrayal rarely travels alone. It brings friends. But hearing confirmation was like feeling the bruise beneath the skin. That night, I waited until David fell asleep, his breath heavy and uneven. Then I slipped out of bed, pulled on jeans and a jacket, and drove to the Lakeside Motel. The neon sign flickered like a dying heartbeat. I parked across the street and watched. At 11:43 p.m., David stepped out of room 12. He wasn't alone. A woman with blonde curls and a red coat followed him. They spoke quietly, too quietly to hear. She placed a hand on his arm. He didn't pull away. I gripped the steering wheel, so tight my knuckles turned white. I wanted to scream, to throw the car door open to demand answers. But there's a moment, right before braking, where clarity appears. I saw that moment reflected in the windows of the motel, my face staring back at me, eyes hollow but unbroken. I drove home in silence, the road stretching ahead like a decision I wasn't ready to make. The next morning, David walked into the living room as I was sorting mail. His hair was damp from a shower, and he smelled like peppermint shampoo. He looked normal, like a man who'd slept well, like a man who hadn't shredded someone's world the night before. He kissed the top of my head. My skin crawled. Thinking about repainting the living room, he said. Make things feel fresh. Fresh, new, covered up. I set the mail down and stood. I know about the motel, I said. He froze. The room seemed to shrink around us. He didn't deny it. Not immediately. Instead, he swallowed, throat-bobbing. It's not what you think, he murmured. Then what is it? My voice was calm, unfamiliar. Tell me. Help me understand. He ran a hand through his hair. She's just someone who listens. Someone who doesn't look at me like I've failed. I inhaled slow and steady. And what did you fail at, David? He looked away. Us. The honesty in that one word almost disarmed me. Almost. But then I remembered the shed, the bottle, the message, it's almost done. Is there anything else, I asked? Anything I should know before I decide what happens next? His silence was answer enough. I nodded. Okay. I walked upstairs, closed the bedroom door, and dialed the lawyer. It's time, I said. Time to stop being the historian of my pain. Time to start writing my own next chapter. The next morning, I woke before David. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was waking into a nightmare. I felt like I was waking into a plan. I brewed coffee in silence, the kind of silence that felt clean, like a freshly wiped surface. When David finally came downstairs, I handed him a mug the way I always had. But this time, my hand didn't tremble. He didn't notice the difference, not yet. As he drank, I walked to the front door, picked up my purse, and said, "I'll be out for a bit." "Where to?" he asked, voice light too light. "To take care of myself," I said simply. He frowned, but nodded, and I left. It had rained overnight. The streets gleamed puddles, catching the sunlight like broken mirrors. I drove to the lawyer's office in the next county where no one knew my name, where my story wouldn't be left on someone's porch as gossip. The receptionist looked younger than my youngest niece, fresh-faced, hopeful. When she asked if I needed anything, I almost told her, "I need my life back." Instead, I smiled politely. The lawyer, a woman named Margaret Sanderson, walked me into her office. She had silver streaks in her hair and eyes that made me feel like she'd already seen the worst in life and survived it. "Let's begin," she said. We talked for almost 2 hours. I told her everything I could say, without unraveling about the breakfast, the messages, the motel. I didn't make accusations I couldn't prove. I didn't tell her the fears that woke me at night, the questions that dared to form shapes I couldn't bear to say. Margaret listened, nodding her pen, gliding across her notepad. When I finished, she leaned back, hands folded. "You've been through hell," she said, "but you're not lost. You're ahead. Most people come in after the damage is legally irreversible. You're here now, which means we can protect you." Protect. That word felt like a lighthouse. We began with the basics, separate accounts, emergency contacts, a safety plan. She guided me through the paperwork, step by step, never rushing, never talking down to me. At one point, she paused and said, "I want you to understand, revenge doesn't have to be cruelty. It can be simply reclaiming what's yours." For the first time in months, my eyes burned, not with grief, but with gratitude. Afterward, I drove to my sister Linda's house in Ohio. She greeted me like the world might fall apart if she let go. Her arms were warm, solid. "Stay as long as you need," she said. "I'm not leaving him." "Not yet," I replied. "This isn't running away. This is building the road out." Linda nodded. She understood. We sat at her kitchen table, the one with the chipped corner, from the time her son dropped a toolbox and drank tea. She placed her hand over mine and said gently, "Don't forget to grieve. You don't have to be a soldier every day." But I did, at least for now. When I got home later, David was in the living room, staring at the TV without really watching it. He muted it when I walked in. "I missed you," he said. For a split second, I saw the man I married, the man who danced with me in the rain outside our first apartment, the man who carved our initials into the oak tree behind the house. I missed that man too, but nostalgia is a trap that looks like a memory. "I need space," I said. He ran a hand over his face. "I don't know what you think I've done." "No," I replied. "I don't think. I know." He didn't ask what I knew. He just swallowed hard and turned back to the muted screen. Over the next week, I became a quiet storm. I met with the accountant. I moved documents into the lockbox. I photographed the shed from the outside, documenting the lock, the windows, the boards. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to, not yet. I found the contractor's invoice in David's desk drawer. It mentioned insulation ceiling ventilation. None of it made sense, but I copied it. Margaret would know what to do with it. And every night, I slept in the guest bedroom, with the door locked. Some nights I heard David pacing in the hallway. Some nights I heard nothing at all. Silence can be company when you're used to worse. On Thursday, I sat on our back porch as the sunset blurred into purple. Fireflies blinked across the yard like little lanterns. David joined me, hands in his pockets. "Do you hate me?" he asked quietly. I took a long breath. No, I said. Hate takes energy I don't have. He nodded, but his eyes glistened. For a moment, I wondered if he finally realized what he'd done. Not just the actions, but the erosion, the gradual wearing down of trust until it crumbled like dried petals. Can I fix it? He asked. Not everything broken needs to be fixed, I said. Some things need to be replaced. He flinched. Then he left me with the fireflies and the fading light. The next morning, I called Margaret and told her I was ready for the next step. She instructed me to gather only what I needed: birth certificate, marriage certificate, property documents. Keep originals secured, she warned. Make copies of everything else. David noticed the missing folders. He didn't say a word. We passed each other in the house like ghosts. One evening, I found him sitting at the kitchen table, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. I never wanted to hurt you, he said. I just didn't know how to be who you needed me to be. I never asked you to be perfect, I replied, just honest. He looked up, eyes rimmed red. I am honest. Silence fell between us like snow. Then softly, I said, I don't believe you. He nodded once, like he'd been waiting for those words. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. Because I wasn't breaking us. He already had. I was just stepping out of the wreckage. I didn't file the papers right away. Revenge, when done right, is not a fire, it's a map. And I was still drawing the lines. A week after meeting with Margaret, I went to the bank. The teller recognized me. In a town like ours, anonymity is a luxury. Her name was Clarissa, a woman in her 60s, with soft curls and kind eyes. She asked how I'd been. I told her, better one step at a time. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough. I opened a new checking account and moved a portion of our savings, my portion, into it. All of it done legally, all of it documented. The manager shook my hand and said, if you ever need advice, we're here. It felt like the universe, reminding me I wasn't alone. When I got home, David was in the garage. The door open, his back turned. He was sorting through tools, pretending to be absorbed. But every so often, he'd glance toward the house, waiting to see if I'd come, acknowledge him. I didn't. I walked inside, set my purse down, and breathed. One breath, then another. Later that night, as I prepared tea, I heard David behind me. What did you do at the bank? His voice was low, tight. I didn't turn around. What I'm allowed to do, what's mine. He exhaled a sound, somewhere between a laugh and a growl. So that's how it is now, Ikritz. I stirred honey into my tea. We've been living in secrets for a while, David. I'm just not the one drowning in them anymore. He stepped closer. If you think I'm some kind of monster. I don't think anything I said, finally facing him. I know what I've felt. I know what I've seen. I know what you've hidden. For a moment, the kitchen light flickered, a bulb nearing its end. Or maybe the house was just reacting to the tension. David's shoulders sagged. He looked older. Or maybe I was just seeing him clearly for the first time. I want to make this right, he murmured. Then tell the truth, I replied. He didn't. Over the next days, my world became a collage of evidence. Receipts, copies of insurance policies, text messages, dates of motel visits. The more I gathered, the more a picture formed, like seeing a puzzle from the wrong side, and finally, flipping it over. One afternoon, I drove to the county records office. The clerk, a man with wire-rimmed glasses and an overgrown mustache, found a file in my husband's name, a property listing, a loan application, a request for a business permit, a new address he'd written down. It looked like he'd been planning a future, one that didn't include me. I stepped outside, sat on a bench, and let the wind cool my skin. There were no tears left. I'd cried them all out in hospital rooms, in pillowcases, and parking lots. What was left wasn't grief. It was clarity. When I got home, I found David in the kitchen. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air. He'd set the table for 2 candles, cloth napkins, the good plates we only used at Thanksgiving. It should have been romantic. It wasn't. It felt like a stage set for a performance neither of us wanted to watch. "I thought we could talk," he said. I sat, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to hear what he thought talking meant. He folded his hands. "I know I hurt you." Hurt, such a small word for such heavy consequences. He continued, "I made mistakes. I should have been there. I should have listened more. I should have." "You should have told me the truth," I interrupted. He swallowed. I was scared. Of what I asked, of losing me, or of being seen for who you really are. He looked down at his hands. Both. The silence that settled wasn't fragile. It was final. I stood. "I've contacted a lawyer. Papers will be delivered soon." He stared at me, eyes wide. "Is that what you want?" "No," I said, and for a moment his face softened. "But it's what I deserve." I walked upstairs before he could speak again. I closed the bedroom door and leaned against it, my pulse steady. For the first time in months, I felt like I was choosing myself. 2 days later, I made my final preparations. I met with Margaret again. We reviewed everything. She placed the divorce papers in front of me, and I signed. "Do you feel ready?" she asked. "No," I admitted, "but I feel right." She nodded, accepting that as the answer it was. On the drive home, the sky was watercolor again, pink-orange, fading blue. The day I lost the baby had looked just like this. I let myself think about that for a moment. Not the pain, but the love, the hope. I let myself honor what could have been, quietly, gently, without breaking. When I arrived home, David was sitting on the porch. He stood when he saw me. "I know what's coming," he said. "I'm not going to fight it." "Good," I replied, "because I'm tired of fighting." He stepped closer. "Can I ask you something?" I nodded. "Do you think, someday, you might forgive me?" The question didn't hurt the way I expected. It just sat there, like a pebble dropped in a still pond. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Forgiveness isn't a door I can force open. It's something that might find me, or it might not." He accepted that. For once he didn't argue. "I hope you find peace," he murmured. I looked past him, at the oak tree we carved our initials into decades ago. The letters were weathered, now barely visible. "I hope we both do," I said. Then I walked inside. That night I sat on the couch, turned off all the lights, and let the quiet fill the room. I thought about revenge, what it really meant. It wasn't destroying someone. It wasn't proving anything. It was reclaiming the parts of myself I'd handed away, the parts I'd lost, the parts I'd been forced to grieve. My revenge wasn't loud. It was leaving. It was choosing a future where I existed outside of his shadow. It was breathing again. And for the first time, I felt like I could. The divorce papers were served on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of chamomile tea when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw a delivery driver step back, clipboard, in hand envelope, tucked neatly under his arm. David opened the door before I could stand. "Mr. Hayes," the driver asked. David nodded. The envelope exchanged hands, and for a heartbeat, everything felt suspended. The way dust floats in sunlight, the way breath catches before a sob, the way a chapter ends without punctuation. When David closed the door, he didn't look at me. He set the envelope down on the hall table like it weighed far more than paper should. For a moment, I saw the battle behind his eyes. Pride wrestling with regret, denial fighting with surrender. In the end, regret won. It usually does. "I'll sign them," he said. His voice was quiet, stripped of the defensiveness that had clung to him these past months. "I won't drag this out." "Thank you," I replied, because even in endings, gratitude matters. Over the following weeks, life didn't change all at once. Change was gradual, like thawing ice. Some days, I woke up and felt 10 years younger. Other days, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I'd let my world shrink so small. The shed behind the house became a symbol of everything I didn't know, every lie, every missing piece, every answer that would never be spoken aloud. I still didn't go inside. The lawyer advised against it. "Let the court handle evidence," she reminded me. "Your safety comes first." Instead, I focused on rebuilding myself in places that didn't hold ghosts. I started going to the community center on Tuesdays for a grief support group. Most of the women were older than me, widows, mothers, women whose hands trembled when they spoke. We sat in a circle on folding chairs, drinking weak coffee from styrofoam cups. There were no dramatics, no confessions screamed into the void. Just stories, long, winding stories that reminded me pain has many languages and healing has many dialects. One woman, Ruth, with white curls and eyes like soft rain, told me, "You don't need to be okay today. Just be honest." Honesty felt like a gift. I unwrapped it slowly. Soon after, I started walking around the neighborhood again. The sidewalks felt familiar under my shoes, the cracks in the pavement, like the lines on my palms. People waved. Some avoided eye contact, probably unsure what was safe to ask. Small towns can be both cradle and cage. One afternoon, as I reached the park at the end of Willow Street, I saw Mary Collins sitting on a bench, the same woman who'd told me about the motel. She looked nervous, twisting her wedding ring. "I'm sorry if I overstepped," she blurted the moment I approached. "You didn't," I said, sitting beside her. "You told me the truth. That's more than most people would do." She nodded relief, softening her shoulders. We talked about the weather, her grandchildren, the fall festival coming up. Normal things. Things that reminded me life didn't stop just because mine had been broken open. Before I left, she said, "Eleanor, I'm proud of you." I didn't know what to say, so I smiled. Sometimes acceptance is easier than deflection. When the court date arrived, I wore a navy dress, simple, unadorned, strong. Linda came with me, her arm threaded through mine like an anchor. The courthouse smelled like floor polish and paper. In the hallway, David stood alone, hands clasped in front of him. He looked smaller somehow, like a man who'd misplaced something, but couldn't remember what. When his eyes met mine, he didn't flinch. He nods, just a small, silent acknowledgement. I nodded back. We were no longer enemies. We were no longer partners. We were two people in the space between. In the courtroom, the judge asked questions. Names, dates, assets. There were no accusations shouted, no tears weaponized, just the clean, clinical language of endings. At one point, the judge looked at me. "Mrs. Hayes, do you wish to speak?" I did, not to hurt him, not to expose him, but to release myself. I stood. My voice didn't shake. "Your Honor," I stayed, because I loved what we had. I'm leaving, because I love who I still am. David's eyes glistened. He didn't wipe the tears away. The judge nodded. Divorce granted. And just like that, the page turned. The days after were quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't echo, just rests. I donated clothes I no longer wanted, things that smelled like a life I no longer lived. I packed up the guest bedroom and moved back into the master bedroom. I opened the curtains every morning and let the light in, even when I didn't feel ready for brightness. One evening, I sat on the back porch with a cup of coffee. The sun melted into the horizon, streaks of orange and lavender stretching across the fields. I listened to the wind, the cicadas, the hum of a neighbor's lawnmower, and I didn't feel alone. David came by the next week to pick up some things. He paused on the porch before stepping inside. "Can I ask you one more thing?" he said. I nodded. "Do you ever think we could have saved it if we'd tried sooner?" I looked at him, really looked, at the man I married, at the man he became, at the man I was finally ready to let go of. "We should have tried sooner," I said, "but we didn't. And that's the truth we have to live with." He nodded, accepting it with a grace I never expected. "Thank you," he said, "for not hating me." "I don't need to hate you," I replied. "I just need to heal." He left with a soft goodbye. No slam doors, no accusations. Just closure, quiet and real. Later that night, I walked to the shed. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Whatever was hidden there belonged to the past. The woman I was becoming didn't have to dig through rubble to prove she'd survived. I turned and walked back to the house. With every step, I felt lighter, not because the burden was gone, but because I had placed it down. Revenge, it turns out, wasn't destroying him. Revenge was choosing myself. Revenge was walking away from the fire without smelling like smoke. Revenge was being more than what tried to break me. The months that followed weren't perfect. Healing isn't a door you walk through and suddenly find yourself in paradise. It's more like a garden you learn to tend slowly, patiently, seed by seed. Some days bloom, some days wither. Both matter. I started volunteering at the library on Main Street. Just a few hours a week, shelving books or reading to children during story hour. The first time I held a picture book and opened my mouth to speak, my voice trembled. Not from sadness, just from being unused to joy. But as the children gathered close eyes, wide laughter spilling out like music, I felt something inside me loosen. Not heal completely, just loosen, enough to breathe. I also joined a quilting group. The first meeting, I stitched 3 crooked squares that looked like they'd been sewn in the dark. The second meeting, I made 4. By the 5th, I had a pattern forming, uneven but honest. The other women didn't care about the crooked edges. "Life isn't straight either," Ruth told me, threading her needle with a wink. I believed her. At home, I made changes in small increments, painting the living room a shade of blue that reminded me of morning skies on good days, rearranging furniture so the house stopped echoing with his absence. I donated the dishes we bought together at a flea market in Chicago, replacing them with ones that felt right in my hands. Thick ceramic plates with tiny flowers along the rim. Dishes for someone rebuilding. One Tuesday, I sat on the porch with a notebook. I wrote a list across the top, what I want now. Not what I lost, not what I used to have. Just now. I scribbled, peaceful mornings with coffee, a garden with tomatoes and basil, laughter that doesn't hurt, a dog, maybe. When I got to the last bullet, I paused. Forgiveness. The pen hovered, not because I wanted to offer it freely, but because I wanted to believe it might come someday. like spring after a harsh Indiana winter, unpromised, but possible. I didn't write his name beside it. Forgiveness wasn't for him. It was for the version of me who stayed too long. One crisp Sunday months, after the divorce was finalized, I ran into David at the grocery store. He stood by the oranges, turning one in his hand, like he didn't know what to do with it. His shoulders curved inward as though bracing for cold. I could have ducked into another aisle. I could have pretended not to see him. But I didn't. I walked forward, step by step, until we stood a few feet apart. He looked up. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by something gentler. "Eleanor," he said, voice soft. "Hello, David." There was a beat of silence, not heavy, just present. "You look well," he said. "So do you," I replied. And it was true. He looked like a man learning to live with consequences, instead of hiding behind intentions. We stood there, two people whose lives had intertwined and unraveled, staring at a display of citrus fruit, like it was a compass. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for all of it. I didn't say I forgive you. I didn't say I hate you." The truth was quieter than either. "I hope you find whatever makes you better," I said. "Not for me, for yourself." He nodded, eyes shining. "I hope the same for you." Then he stepped back, and I did too. Not away from him, just toward where I was meant to go. We didn't hug. We didn't promise to stay in touch. We didn't reopen wounds by trying to turn endings into beginnings. Some chapters are meant to close. I picked up a bag of oranges and moved on. My cart rattled down the aisle like an anthem. That winter, I adopted a dog from the shelter, a beagle mix named Penny, with floppy ears and a bark too big for her body. She followed me from room to room, tail wagging like a flag of truce. I talked to her more than I talked to anyone, and she listened like she understood every word. Some nights, I still woke with the ache of what could have been of the baby. I never met the future that slipped away. I didn't hide from the ache anymore. I sat with it. I whispered to it. I let it exist without letting it consume me. Grief became a guest, not a warden. There were small victories, making pancakes without shaking, sleeping through the night, laughing at a joke on the radio. There were setbacks, too. Days I couldn't step outside memories that clawed their way to the surface, moments when bitterness nipped at my heels. Healing wasn't linear, but it was movement, and I was moving. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the world in gold, I brewed tea and sat on the back porch, wrapped in a quilt I'd stitched myself. Penny curled at my feet. Fireflies danced across the yard like scattered stars. I closed my eyes and spoke aloud, gentle, honest, steady. "I am still here. Not broken. Not defeated. Still here." The wind answered with a soft rustle through the trees, carrying my words toward whatever comes next. If you've listened this far, if my story settled somewhere in your chest, then hear this. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to rebuild. You are allowed to choose yourself, even if it costs you the life you thought you needed. Revenge isn't always fire. Sometimes it's a door closing quietly behind you. Sometimes it's silence steady as a heartbeat. Sometimes it's simply becoming someone you're proud to be. If you've ever lost yourself in someone else's shadow, let this be a reminder. Step into the light. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be safe. You deserve to begin again. If my story meant something to you, share it. If you know someone who needs hope, send this their way. And if you'd like to hear more stories like mine,